Alright, in this video I'm going to show you how I make my sourdough bread. There are many different ways and methods to make sourdough bread, and everybody thinks that their way is right. I am no stickler to any particular method, but this is the one I use and that has worked well for me. My recipe is based on Lily Nichols' recipe, and I will link her blog post on this down below. It's pretty difficult to read through a sourdough recipe and not be super overwhelmed and intimidated by the process. So I'm hoping a video version of this will make this look a little less intimidating. My process goes through a 2-day method in order to create a longer ferment process, which creates less of a blood sugar impact with the bread and helps it to be a little bit easier digestible for people who are gluten intolerant. The only special item that you will need that's not commonplace is a sourdough starter. I did not create my original starter. Mine was given to me by a good friend, but I'm pretty sure that places like Facebook Marketplace and friends that you know might have a starter that you can find one from, or there's lots of recipes online to create your own starter. The flours that I use for mine are what Lily recommends are the King Arthur whole wheat flour and the King Arthur bread flour, and both of these are organic, and she explains in the blog why that is important to get organic, and you guys can read that and learn for yourself. So the first step, I usually do this in the morning of the first day, but it's afternoon now, so I'll show you what I do when I start it a little bit later. But the first process is to feed the starter. Most people will keep their sourdough starter alive on the counter all the time, and they're always having to feed it, and it makes a bunch, and you have to figure out what to do with the extras. I don't have time for that, so once I'm done with my extra starter, I'll just put it in the fridge and pull it out when I need it. So let's get this starter going. So I kind of already started on this, but I measured out a half of a cup of the starter and I'm putting it in this bowl. I also read, after I had already been making this for several months, I read that you're not supposed to use anything metal with sourdough because it can affect the rise or ferment process, but I've been doing it this way for a while and never had any problems. So I have a half a cup in here. I'm going to measure out a cup of water. You want to use filtered water because the chlorine in tap water can kill the rise. So I poured that in, and then I'm just gonna mix that together to get the starter incorporated with the water. Okay. Now I'm going to measure out a cup and a half of the bread flour. I also like this method because it doesn't need a scale. Everything else is like by grams, and that can get really annoying. So I like just being able to use a measuring cup and be done with it. Okay. Mix that together again. And that is a pretty good consistency there. I might add a tiny splash of water. A little bit goes a long way if you're adding extra water, so don't overdo it. Okay, I'm happier with that. You can see it's just like a thick paste. Okay, so now because I started this later in the day, usually it'll take like 8 to 10 hours for this to rise and be ready to start your dough. So because it's later in the day, it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm gonna cover this and put it in the oven with the light on, just to give a warm environment for it to rise faster. All right, so it's 5 o'clock now, and you can see it's already starting to bubble and rise. We'll give that a few more hours before we use it. So here we are about an hour later, and we have risen to the top. This is about where I let it get before I'm ready to use it. This is a, I believe, 1.5 quart bowl. So Lily recommends you can take like a little glob of this and dump it in some water, and if it sinks, then it's not ready to use that, and if it floats, then it is ready. I've never done that. I just let it get to this point and use it from here. So now I'm going to stir it down. And all those bubbles will kind of release. Okay, now I'm going to measure out 2 cups of this starter. And I'm gonna use a very large bowl. Like I said, I've been using metal just fine. Hasn't caused any problems for me. Okay, now I'm gonna get 2.5 cups of water. Okay, there's 2 cups. Lily says to measure out 2 cups first, mix your dough, and then if you need more, if it's too sticky, to add another 1/2 cup. I've never not needed the extra 1/2 cup, so I just add it right away. And again, make sure you're using filtered water. Okay, so same when I start off, I'm gonna mix the starter with the water to get it well incorporated. Now I'm going to measure out 4 cups of whole wheat flour. My husband has our kids outside right now, but most of the time when I'm doing this, I have little feet around me running around and needing emergency potty breaks and whatever else. So to keep track of my cups, so I'm not just counting, I'll kind of put my 4 cups in like the 4 corners of the bowl, so I can easily look in and see how many cups I've done if I have to run away halfway through. Okay, so 4 cups of the whole wheat flour, and then 2 cups of the bread flour. And then I'm just gonna give that a good stir. At this point, it's going to look pretty shaggy and not like a nice ball of dough. And that's okay. So I'd say that's pretty nicely incorporated. That's about what it's going to look like. Just kind of shaggy and messy and still kind of goopy. And that's okay. So now I'm going to leave this on the counter for about 45 minutes. Lily says between 30 and 60 minutes. I found that 45 minutes is about the sweet spot for a nice final loaf of bread. Just cover that up and let that sit. You'll have a little bit left over of the starter, and I will just add that right to my starter jar in the fridge, and then I'll use that for my next batch. All right, it's been 45 minutes, so I'm gonna uncover that. So after this first 45-minute rest, you are going to take a tablespoon of sea salt and add it in. Okay, so I just sprinkle it evenly over the top. You're gonna scoop your hand underneath and stretch the dough and fold it over itself. And then do that again, kind of turn it, stretch, and fold it over. And do that a few more times until it just isn't really gonna stretch anymore. Stretch, fold it over. So it's starting to get a little stiff now. Maybe try one more. Yep, so it's pretty stiff. Okay, and then I'm gonna take this and, to the best of my ability, I'm going to kind of tuck the ends under. It is still pretty sticky, so it's not gonna be the greatest, but just kind of try and do the best you can. That's about as good as it's gonna get. Right there. Then I'm just going to cover that up again and let it rest for another 45 minutes. Another 45 minutes later. So I'm going to uncover this, and it's starting to look a little bit more incorporated together. And I'm just gonna do one more stretch and fold before I put it in the fridge for the night. So I'm gonna do the same thing and just kind of scrape the edges with my hands. Pull and fold over. Kind of spin pull and fold over. Each time I do this, I just do it until it's not really stretchy anymore. Which we're about getting there now. Okay, so then I will, again, just kind of tuck under the edges as much as I can. It's still slightly sticky, but definitely less than it was before. And I'm gonna cover this with plastic wrap. And now I'm just gonna stick this in the fridge overnight. All right, so it is 11 o'clock in the morning the next day. I just took this out of the fridge about an hour ago just to let it come to room temperature a little bit more so it's easier to work with. So what I'm gonna do now is uncover it and do the same stretch and fold method. It has grown a bit, as you can probably see. So this is gonna knock it back down. And that's about as much as I'm gonna stretch it. So that was just 3 folds. And then I'm gonna do the same tuck and fold just to get it into a nice tight ball. Okay, so that's a pretty decent ball. I'm gonna cover this back up, kind of shake off the condensation from the plastic wrap and turn it upside down so it doesn't drip in there. Okay, so now this is where I deviate from Lily's recipe. She does this and then puts it back in the fridge for the rest of the day and does another stretch and fold and bakes it off the next morning. I'm usually in a rush and I need the bread for sandwiches for my boys. So what I'll do now is leave this out on the counter throughout the day. Our house over the summer is at about 75 degrees, so I take it out a little bit later morning and let it rise throughout the day. So then by the afternoon, it's ready to do the next step. Hopefully that's not too confusing. We'll just keep moving on to our next steps once we get there. So now this is just gonna stay on the counter for the rest of the day until it's risen enough for me to make it into the balls of dough for baking. Just wanted to show you guys, it is about 2:40 now, and this is how far it has risen so far. I've been doing a little baking in the kitchen, so it's getting a little warmer in here, which causes it to rise a little faster. Okay, so it is just before 4 o'clock and we've already risen to this point in just an hour. It is just about touching the plastic, so we are ready to turn this out. I have no idea if I do this next step correctly according to sourdough recipes, but this is what I do. Just dump it out onto the counter. This batch will make 2 loaves of bread. So once I have this dumped out, I'm going to cut it in half. And the one sourdough thing that I should probably invest in is a dough knife. But for now, this is just what I use. So I just take my knife, cut it in half as evenly as possible. Oh, I did wash my counters before I started this. I think this one might be a little bit smaller. But then I kind of try and fold it to where the top side is up again. Okay, and then from here, yeah, I'm making some bread. Then from here, I don't know how to explain this other than I will take my hands with my right hand and just kind of pull and then tuck underneath. And my left hand just guides. And this is actually a little bit stickier than it usually is. So we'll see. Just kind of pull or push with my right hand forward away from me. And I also don't know if this is right, but I will pop the bubbles as I go. I'm gonna push and then tuck under. And it just kind of, the point is to create a tight ball. So however you would like to do that, this is just how I do it. I'll do that for a few turns until I feel like that's pretty good and tight. And then I will do the same thing with the next. The left hand literally is just here to guide it from going all over the place. Okay, this seems to be pretty tight. That's about good. Now I'm going to get a towel again and get it soaking wet and then squeeze out the excess water. Okay, it's got dough on there from my hands. It's not dirty. Then I'm going to cover this and leave it on the counter for about 20 minutes. Okay, 20 minutes later. While that was resting, I greased 2 loaf pans. I have a traditional loaf pan as well as a 7x11 Pyrex dish. I actually prefer this one. I might get another one of those because it spreads out farther and you get more of a oval shaped loaf instead of a really tall one, which ends up cutting easier and is nicer for sandwiches. Okay, so I'm gonna pull this off and I'm gonna do the same stretch and roll method, and then once they're done, I'm gonna put them in the loaf pans. Okay, let me start with this one. Just gonna push and tuck. You're whispering? Okay, so just a few tucks and pulls, and then I'm gonna transfer it right into the pan. And then the same thing here. Yeah. So what am I doing next summer week? I don't know. What are you doing next summer week? Oh. Okay. Woo! That was a little bit stickier than normal. But now I'm just going to cover these again with the towel and wait until they're ready. So you'll know when they're ready once it has risen. I guess this is kind of my gauge, is that I use the regular loaf pan, and once the mound is risen above the edge of the pan, then I know it's ready to bake. So this isn't any particular time allotment for this. It's just keep an eye on it, and once it's ready to bake. So I will come back to you guys later once that is ready. Okay, it is now 8:30 at night, and this is where we are. These typically rise a little bit more than this, so I'm not exactly sure what's happening tonight, but this is still good, and it's what we're gonna work with. So what I do now is I will typically use like a box cutter blade, but I needed a fresh blade anyway, so this time I'm gonna try a crafting X-Acto blade, and we'll see how that works. Okay, so I have preheated my oven to 450 degrees, and I'm gonna go ahead and throw these in there now. So this is definitely not my best looking batch so far, but that's kind of the nature of sourdough. Each batch likes to do its own thing sometimes. But now that it's 9:30 at night, I am going to let these cool on the counter all night long and slice into them for lunch tomorrow. But this is where I'm gonna end the video, so if you have any questions, leave them down below. If you've tried this and it worked, let me know too. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.